My name is Lauren Pierce, and the day everything snapped began right in my parents' living room in Beaverton. I walked in knowing they had already decided the ending of a story I wasn't even allowed to tell, but I sat down anyway, watching everyone gather like it was some kind of family victory party. Then she stood up. She didn't wait for anyone to settle. She just lifted her glass, flashed that rehearsed smile, and said loudly enough for the whole neighborhood to hear, "Mom and Dad are giving me all 6 rental houses in Salem. Too bad, Lauren, you're getting nothing." The applause hit instantly. People clapped like they had been waiting years for that announcement. My mother looked like she might cry from pride. A cousin shouted something about finally doing the right thing. They all acted as if I wasn't even there, as if my future had already been erased, and they were thrilled about it. But I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just looked straight at my mother, held her gaze, and said quietly, "Mom, you really don't know, do you?" Every sound in the room died. A fork stopped halfway to someone's mouth. A drink spilled a little because the person holding it froze. And then her voice cut through the silence. "Know what?" She wasn't smiling anymore. That was the exact second the mood cracked. You could feel it, like the floor shifted a few inches, and no one knew where to stand anymore. They thought today was about celebrating her, about pushing me aside with a polite sentence and a crowd to back it up. They had no idea they were seconds away from learning just how wrong they were. Before I tell you what my mother didn't know and why half the people in that room couldn't look me in the eye ever again, tell me this. Have you ever watched your own family celebrate something that was never theirs to take? If you want to understand why that moment in the living room hit so hard, I need to take you back to my childhood in Beaverton, to the years when it became painfully clear that expectations in our house were never divided evenly. Growing up, I watched attention flow in one direction like water down a slope. Vanessa got every resource, every opportunity, every inch of patience my parents could offer. If she wanted dance classes, she got them. If she wanted new equipment for a sport, she'd quit. 2 weeks later, they paid for it anyway. They called her driven, talented, deserving, and the world bent to fit whatever story they were telling about her that week. Meanwhile, I learned the skill of disappearing. When I brought home a good grade, the reaction was mild at best, a quick nod before the conversation drifted back to Vanessa's latest plan. When I needed help, they'd say they were exhausted or that we needed to save money. Somehow, the savings always resurfaced whenever Vanessa needed something, but never when I asked. I stopped expecting fairness long before I understood the word. I just learned to move quietly around their priorities. And that might have shaped the rest of my life if it hadn't been for Uncle Harvey Stone, who noticed everything they didn't. Harvey wasn't the type to smother anyone with praise, and he definitely wasn't the type to take sides out loud, but he paid attention, the kind of attention that makes a kid stand a little straighter without even knowing why. One Saturday, he asked if I wanted to ride with him to Salem to check on a few of his rental houses. No one had ever invited me to anything that wasn't a group obligation. I said yes before he finished the sentence. Those drives became the closest thing I had to a classroom built just for me. Harvey talked me through things I'd never heard adults explain, like why a tenant's stability mattered more than squeezing out extra rent, or how ignoring a small leak could cost more than fixing it early. He wasn't lecturing, he was sharing the logic behind his actions, and for the first time in my life, I felt like someone thought I had the capacity to understand real decisions. One afternoon, he handed me a folder with receipts and maintenance logs from 3 of the houses. "Tell me what looks off," he said. I didn't know what he was testing, but I flipped through the papers anyway. A few entries stuck out, charges that didn't match the work-listed dates that seemed oddly close together. He watched silently as I pointed them out. "You've got an eye for things people overlook," he said, like it was a fact, not a compliment. No one had ever said anything like that to me at home. Another day, after we'd visited a tenant who'd fallen behind because her hours were cut at work, Harvey slipped her extra time to catch up. On the way back to the truck, he said, "Numbers show you the situation. People show you whether you can trust the story. That line stayed with me longer than anything my parents had ever told me. Harvey didn't treat me like a backup character in Vanessa's life. He treated me like someone who could handle responsibility, someone worth investing time in. And even though he never spelled it out, I felt something steady in the way he looked at me, like he recognized traits that no one else in my family bothered to notice. I didn't know it then, but those quiet weekends riding through Salem were the first steps toward a future none of us could see yet, except maybe him. When I reached the point where I could finally shape my own life, I didn't hesitate. I accepted a job offer from a financial analysis firm in Seattle, packed my small apartment in Beaverton, and drove north without waiting for anyone's approval. It wasn't rebellion, it was survival. Seattle wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and for the first time, the silence around me didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space to breathe. My parents called during the first few weeks, but the conversations were thin and predictable. They asked if the city was overwhelming, if I was sure I could handle the workload, and then, without missing a beat, shifted to updates about Vanessa's latest achievement. She was taking on more responsibilities, she was impressing people, she was becoming everything they always said she would be. The message underneath was clear. Vanessa was still the center, and I was still the footnote. I stopped expecting anything different. Back in Oregon, Harvey continued managing his properties in Salem, but travel made it harder for him to handle every errand himself. Since I lived too far away, he turned to Vanessa Pierce for small tasks, like picking up rent envelopes or dropping off notices. My parents saw it as a chance for her to help the family. Harvey didn't mind giving her a chance. He believed people revealed their character when entrusted with something that wasn't glamorous but mattered nonetheless. Vanessa approached the role the same way she approached everything, carelessly confident. She forgot pickup days, mixed up tenant names, and relied on charm to soften the frustration she caused. My parents defended her instantly, claiming she was just busy. Harvey wasn't convinced, but he kept his concerns to himself. That changed the day he called me in Seattle. I was at my desk reviewing financial statements when my phone buzzed. Harvey's tone was steady as always, but there was a tightness behind his words as he asked why I hadn't delivered rent from 2 tenants the previous week. I told him I hadn't handled collections since moving. A long pause followed before he read a message Vanessa had sent him earlier. Lauren forgot to drop off the payments. I reminded her last week. My heart didn't sink, it hardened. I wasn't even in Oregon yet. She used my name without hesitation, assuming Harvey would never question her. I told him exactly where I'd been and what I'd been doing. Harvey listened quietly, then said, "That's what I thought," with a certainty that told me he'd suspected the truth long before this moment. A few days later, he emailed me 2 scanned invoices asking if I saw anything unusual. During my lunch break, I studied them closely, and the inconsistencies were impossible to miss. Charges that repeated without justification, new contractors he'd never used, inflated totals that didn't match the kind of maintenance those houses typically required. When I pointed everything out, Harvey didn't sound surprised at all. He thanked me, told me he knew I'd be honest, and ended the call. From that moment, the energy at home shifted again, even from afar. My parents praised Vanessa more loudly. They said she was helping keep everything afloat that she was carrying more than people realized. The irony wasn't lost on me. They admired her effort even when the facts showed something entirely different. But what stayed with me wasn't the lie itself. It was the confidence with which she delivered it. The expectation that Harvey would blindly trust her simply because my parents always had. Harvey didn't confront her right away. Instead, he watched quietly, asking for more receipts, more logs, more explanations. And with each question, it became clearer that the numbers were telling a story Vanessa never intended anyone to read. A few weeks after Harvey began asking questions about the strange expenses he'd uncovered, he called me one afternoon, with a tone I'd never heard from him before, calm, measured, and carrying an edge that left no room for postponing anything. He told me to come to Salem because there was something we needed to settle in person. He didn't explain, and I didn't push. Early the next morning, I drove down and met him at his house, where he was already waiting at the kitchen table with two thick folders placed neatly in front of him. Without any warm-up, he pointed to the first folder and said, "Start here." Inside were the financial discrepancies he'd been analyzing. He let me flip through the papers, rent logs, repair invoices, contractor statements, and the issues were no longer subtle. Duplicate charges. Vendors he'd never worked with. Repairs that didn't match the timeline of his actual visits. The pattern looked deliberate. Harvey watched me read not to see whether I understood, but to confirm what he already knew. When I closed the folder expecting him to continue discussing the financial mess, he slid the second folder toward me. This one was heavier and sealed with a seriousness the first didn't have. When I opened it, my breath caught before I could stop myself. At the top was a fully executed trust document naming me as successor. Beneath it were 6 deed transfers, each labeled with one of the Salem properties, each notarized, each finalized. "These are real," Harvey said quietly, as if he needed to say it aloud before I could process the weight of what was in my hands. I looked up, unsure what expression I wore, but he seemed to understand without needing words. He leaned back in his chair and told me he'd been preparing this for a long time. Not because he doubted the rest of the family, he said, but because he trusted me. Then he told a story I had nearly forgotten. When I was around 12, he'd brought a handwritten spreadsheet into his truck to review repairs. I'd pointed out 2 numbers that were misaligned, then rewrote the totals at the bottom. He said I did it with the same calm I had now, without bragging or trying to impress him. I simply corrected what was wrong, because it mattered to me. That day, he said, I realized you pay attention for the right reasons. Good character outlives loud reputations. The words lingered long after he said them. Harvey explained that he'd structured the trust to protect the properties from being mismanaged or drained by anyone who treated them like a trophy rather than a responsibility. He wanted them in the hands of someone who understood people as much as numbers, someone who saw tenants as more than rent checks. I shook my head slightly and told him I didn't know what to say. He raised a hand and replied, "You don't have to say anything. You just have to understand what this means." A notary arrived shortly after. A man Harvey trusted, someone who'd handled past documents for him. He verified each signature, stamped every deed, and placed the completed set back into the folder. When the notary left, Harvey pushed the folder to me again, this time with finality. "Keep this private," he said. "Only reveal it when someone tries to take what isn't theirs." His voice wasn't dramatic. It was firm, steady, and absolute, the tone of a man who expected resistance from the world, but had already chosen where he stood. I walked out of his house that afternoon with the folder in my hands and a certainty in my chest that nothing in our family would ever be the same once the truth surfaced. The call came early on a gray morning, the kind where the sky feels lower than usual. It was a former neighbor from Salem letting me know Harvey had passed during the night. The words didn't hit all at once. They landed in pieces, sharp and uneven. I booked a flight home and made it back in time for the small gathering held in the chapel he once volunteered at. People who had known him for decades came up to me one by one, telling me stories. I'd never heard: how he helped replace a family's furnace during a cold winter, how he quietly covered rent for a tenant who was between jobs, how he treated everybody as if they mattered. Standing there listening, I felt the weight of that folder he'd given me more than ever. But the moment the service ended, the shift in my family was instant, almost rehearsed. Vanessa walked toward me with the kind of relieved smile someone wears when they think their problem has finally solved itself. My mother hovered behind her, and my father followed a step later, glancing around as if making sure no one was watching us too closely. They didn't offer condolences. They didn't mention Harvey. My mother simply said, "Come inside. We need to talk before everyone leaves." Inside the dining room, a stack of papers sat in the center of the table. They had set the room like they were conducting business, not mourning someone who had been part of our lives since childhood. My father pushed the top sheet toward me. It was a waiver, clean, professionally drafted, stating that I relinquished any interest in the Salem houses. Vanessa folded her arms and watched me the way someone watches a chess piece they're sure will move the way they expect. My mother spoke first. "Honey, this isn't complicated. You're settled in Seattle. Your career is there. Vanessa has been here helping, and it just makes sense that she handles the properties." She said it gently, as if logic was on her side. My father added, "This keeps things from getting messy. We all know Vanessa has done more for the family over the years." The statement was so backward I almost laughed. Vanessa leaned forward with a smirk she didn't bother to hide. "I mean, seriously, Lauren, you didn't even want to be part of anything around here. You've never contributed. Why make this difficult?" Her tone carried that old confidence she'd worn since we were kids, the belief that my silence equaled weakness. I looked at the papers but didn't touch them. "I'm not signing anything," I said. The air changed immediately. Shoulders stiffened, eyes narrowed, breaths tightened. My mother's voice cracked. "Why would you fight us on something so simple? This is family. We need to stay united." Vanessa gave a short laugh. Translation: just sign it and stop pretending you have a stake in all this. My father's patience thinned. "Lauren, don't turn this into a bigger issue than it needs to be." I stood there absorbing every word, watching the three people who were supposed to care about me act as if I were a problem to contain. That was the moment something inside me finally settled cold and clear. I wasn't angry, I was done. When the three of them stood there pushing those papers at me like a signature could erase everything they didn't want to acknowledge, I thought I finally understood how unfamiliar your own family can feel when they decide you're easier to overlook than respect. I pushed the documents back across the table. No yelling, no explanation, just a simple refusal. Vanessa's jaw tightened. My mother whispered my name as if begging me to reconsider. My father muttered something about me being ungrateful, but I didn't stay long enough to answer any of it. I walked out of that room fully aware that whatever happened next would redraw the entire family line, and I was no longer afraid of where I stood in it. 2 days after that tense meeting in the dining room, I walked back into my parents' house, knowing they had arranged something bigger than a family conversation, but I still didn't expect the full spectacle waiting inside. The place looked less like a home and more like a staged celebration, with floral arrangements, catered trays, and people dressed as if they were attending a community gala instead of a gathering about property ownership. Guests moved around holding glasses of sparkling cider, greeting each other with smiles that stretched a little too wide, and handing Vanessa gift bags wrapped with ribbons. Compliments spilled from every corner. One cousin told her she was born to manage real estate. A neighbor said she would modernize the Salem rentals into something incredible. Even an older couple from down the street hugged her and congratulated her on continuing Harvey's legacy. I stood near the back long enough to hear Mason, her boyfriend, outlining a list of upgrades he thought they should make, talking about joint investments and rental expansion, as if his input was already part of her future income. Vanessa absorbed the attention with perfect posture, smiling like she was accustomed to standing center stage, letting every compliment strengthen the narrative she'd written for herself. My parents watched proudly, moving from group to group, telling people that Vanessa was finally stepping into her role. When the room grew full, Vanessa walked to the center and lifted her glass. The conversation settled almost immediately, and she spoke with that polished confidence she had perfected since we were kids. "I want to thank everyone for being here," she said. "It means a lot to my family and to me. Stepping into Harvey's shoes is a big responsibility, but I'm ready. The Salem houses are officially in good hands." Applause surged through the room like a wave echoing against the walls. Cameras came up, people cheered, and Mason squeezed her shoulder proudly. My mother wiped her eyes. My father clapped first and loudest, and that was the moment they all believed the story was sealed. I let the noise peak before rolling my suitcase across the room. The sound of the wheels on the hardwood wasn't loud, but it cut sharply enough through the celebration that conversations dropped mid-sentence. People turned curiosity shifting into confusion as they noticed the suitcase and the expression on my face. Vanessa tried to maintain her smile, though it faltered at the edges. "Lauren," she said tightly, "you're late." I didn't answer. I walked past her, past Mason, past aunts and neighbors and friends of the family who stepped aside as if clearing a path without fully understanding why. When I reached the coffee table in the center of the room, I set the suitcase upright, flipped the latches, and opened it. No one breathed. I reached inside and pulled out the Trust Harvey's real instructions, the ones drafted long before Vanessa built the fantasy everyone here had been cheering for. I placed it on the table, then removed the 6 recorded deeds, arranging them in a neat line where everyone could see the seals, the dates, the signatures. 6 properties, 6 legal transfers, all executed by Harvey, all filed, all final. The silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It was the kind of silence that falls when a roomful of people realize the role they've been applauding doesn't actually exist. Mason's face went blank. My father's smile collapsed. My mother went pale. Vanessa stared without blinking, her confidence draining out of her like someone had punctured it. A neighbor whispered, "Those are real documents." Another asked quietly, "Did Harvey give everything to Lauren?" But no one stepped forward to touch anything. No one spoke to Vanessa. No one congratulated her anymore. The applause had stopped, replaced by the unmistakable tension of a room watching the ground shift beneath the person they had just crowned. The room seemed to hold its breath as Mr. Callahan stepped closer to the documents, and every set of eyes followed him like he was carrying the verdict to a trial none of them realized they were part of. He didn't speak immediately. He examined the trust, first sliding each page between his fingers with a precision that made the guests inch forward. Then he lifted the first deed, reading the notary seal, the signatures, the dates. His eyebrows tightening just enough to suggest he already knew where this was headed. When he finally looked up, the shift in the room was instant. "These are authentic," he said. "All 6 deeds. Every one of them. Recorded years ago. The trust is valid, properly filed, and legally binding." The sound that followed wasn't noise. It was the absence of it. Vanessa's face froze, and someone whispered, "Years ago." Another guest muttered, "So." This wasn't recent. Before anyone could form a full thought, the front door opened again, and Owen Fisher stepped inside with the kind of timing that felt almost deliberate. He walked straight through the crowd, nodding at me briefly before addressing Mr. Callahan. "I can confirm the timeline," he said. "I drove Harvey to the county office the day he recorded those deeds. He wasn't confused. He wasn't pressured. He made every decision on his own." Vanessa snapped toward him. "Why are you even here?" "Because Harvey asked me to come," Owen said. "He said there might be a day when people tried to twist his intentions." My mother's hand flew to her chest. My father shifted pale. Vanessa's expression hardened into something sharp. "You expect us to believe Lauren didn't manipulate him. She barely visited. And suddenly, everything goes to her." Mr. Callahan cut in swiftly. "We performed a capacity evaluation before the trust was executed. Harvey was fully competent. He knew exactly what he wanted documented. That only fed Vanessa's fury. So what Lauren still took advantage of him. She hid things. She planned this." Her voice cracked, not from sadness but rage. The room, packed with neighbors, cousins, friends, watched the unraveling with the kind of uncomfortable fascination people only show when they're witnessing a fall from a height someone climbed too proudly. My father stepped closer, lowering his voice like he thought reason would somehow find traction now. "Lauren, sweetheart, maybe we can find a middle ground. You have your job. You're stable. Vanessa could really use at least a couple of the houses." My mother chimed in quickly, almost pleading. "Yes, just think about everything she's done here. She's been involved for years." Owen shook his head. Being involved doesn't mean being responsible. Harvey knew who handled things properly and who didn't. Vanessa turned on him. You're lying. You're twisting everything. I'm repeating what he told me, Owen replied. He said you treated the properties like they were already yours. And he didn't trust that. Her jaw clenched. Everyone saw the flash of humiliation she couldn't hide. She turned back to me, pointing sharply. You could fix this if you weren't so selfish. You could share, but you want to watch me lose. I want to honor Harvey, I said. That's all. His decision wasn't a negotiation. He made his choice long before today. My father tried again. One house. Just one. My mother whispered, please. I didn't look away. I'm not rewriting Harvey's wishes to ease anyone's ego. These properties were placed in my name because he trusted me to protect what he spent his life building. The room fell quiet again, not in shock this time, but in resignation, as everyone realized the narrative they'd been celebrating had collapsed completely, and nothing they demanded would change the truth printed on every page of the documents lying on the table. The fallout didn't erupt like a dramatic courtroom scene. It unfolded in the kind of steady, unavoidable way reality handles people who never expected consequences. Investigators reviewing the rental accounts flagged every transfer Vanessa made during the years she claimed she was managing things for the family, and the moment those records were cross-checked with Harvey's trust, the county opened a formal inquiry. She tried to explain away the missing money as mix-ups and temporary withdrawals, but none of it matched the documentation. Within days, her employer placed her on administrative review, then emailed her a termination notice citing misrepresentation of financial activity. Her boyfriend stepped out just as quickly. He told her he needed space to focus on his own future, but everyone knew he didn't want to stay connected to someone being investigated for financial misconduct. He was gone before the week ended. While she scrambled, my parents were swallowed by the pressure of defending her. They hired an attorney, drained their savings for a second consultation, and eventually started selling off anything they could liquidate: furniture, collectibles, even the SUV they used for weekend trips. Each sale came with a new wave of resentment directed at me, as though the burden they carried came from my refusal to help instead of the choices Vanessa made long before that night. I didn't respond to their messages. I didn't defend myself. I simply focused on stabilizing what Harvey left in my hands. Back in Seattle, I partnered with a reputable management company, updated every lease, audited each property, and restructured the accounts so nothing could slip through unnoticed again. The tenants, relieved to finally have repairs addressed instead of ignored, began sending notes of appreciation directly to the management company. The properties turned profitable almost immediately, not because I was exceptional, but because they were no longer being siphoned behind closed doors. My parents kept calling anyway some days, angry, some days pleading, some days pretending nothing had happened at all. The final message I received from my mother said, "We're family. Families owe each other," and that was the moment I blocked their numbers. Family doesn't owe unlimited access. Family doesn't owe silence. Family doesn't erase accountability. Owen was the only person I didn't shut out. He would text once every few weeks, not to pry, but to check that I was doing okay amid the chaos. He never asked for updates on the investigation and never hinted that I should fix anything. He respected the distance I created, and that alone made him the only connection I chose to keep. When the dust finally settled, Vanessa was facing the possibility of restitution. My parents were still drowning under legal fees they took on willingly, and the version of family they tried to force on me had completely collapsed. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was clarity, the kind that comes only after you stop letting people rewrite the definition of love into something that costs you everything. Harvey had understood that long before I did, and in the quiet that followed his lesson finally made sense. You are allowed to choose peace over blood boundaries, over history and self-respect, over the people who mistake your loyalty for permission to take. I didn't walk away to punish them. I walked away because I finally understood I didn't have to stay.